Hey there, and welcome to the First Class Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Freiberger, a former airline captain with over 10,000 flight hours, and I believe that everyone can be a leader. On this show, I talk about a simple concept called take the lead. See, leadership is influence, and take the lead is the choice to build that influence. Your intentions are invisible, but how people experience you never is, which means you can have good intentions and still land wrong with others. Take the lead is how you close that gap. We use aviation as a lens, but you don't need wings to practice it. All right, let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome to the First Class Leaders Podcast. My host today, Erika, Armstrong. We're just going to jump into it, Erika. I'm going to get you to share a little bit of your background, and I could try to do it justice, but I'm sure you're going to do better justice. Erika, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. We'll see here. So I'll try to give you 35 years of aviation experience in 30 seconds. But no, I started back in the aviation world, 1989, went through the business aviation pathway first, started off at the front desk of a little FBO at the Flying Cloud Airport, and flew air ambulance, Part 91, Part 135, you name it, I flew it, dead bodies, hazardous materials, I tried it all. And then of course I lived in Minnesota back at the time, and Northwest Airlines was there. So got to fly the 727, captain on the 727, and then Delta bought out Northwest Airlines. Everybody got furloughed and laid off. I'd been through several of those before and ended up back in business aviation, but on the training side. Got to spend about 6 years at Metropolitan State University teaching students. I actually loved doing it. I still get messages from my former students as they're taking their first flight, and seeing some of them are captains already. It freaks me out that they're already captains at the airline. So, but still working in the business aviation world, doing a lot of instructional design. I love all the technology we can do now for training. So a lot of my research has always been learning how people learn, and especially pilots, and how their personalities affect the way they react and the way they learn. So taking all that knowledge and trying to give it back to the community by helping train the next generation a little bit differently, and create a little different philosophy on it.
I love it. And, I didn't hit record soon enough because we'd already been talking about lots of good nuggets. And, if we just kind of pass over all the fluff, okay, we get to know who you are as far as the process, the 35 years. I've read your book, A Chick in the Cockpit. For anybody listening, I know you've barely met her already, but feel free to read her book. It summarizes you well. And some of the stories that you wrote about are some of the things I think it'd be worth getting into, like some of the challenges. And, I kind of want to I'll brief the audience a little bit again, because this is a fairly new podcast, but what we're in the business of is just sharing experiences, challenges, specifically tying them to leadership, and how making an intentional effort or intentional decisions, or maybe sometimes not an intentional decision, how it impacted the people around you. And, obviously you've made a series of decisions that have led you to where you are. And now you're, empowering and teaching and inspiring, hundreds, dozens, thousands of people, whatever the number is. But what I'm curious about is, for the people listening, what are some of the challenges that you faced, wherever you want to start? And what was the lesson that you learned, or what was the leadership lesson you learned?
That's a big question.
I know. So feel free to start anywhere, and we'll just kind of poke and prod and see what comes out.
With like 10,000 different answers. So let me do it this way. So I'll start with right now. Like one of the questions I am always asked and continue to ask is like why there are not more women in aviation. So I'm going to take that question and go all the way back to when I started, right? And the culture then and now are really different. They really are. And so I have kind of in my research actually discovered maybe a more scientific reason why there's not more women in aviation. People don't like to hear it because we like to blame it on the culture. Still is a very macho culture. It's a blue collar world, even though we're wearing white shirts. It's rough and tumble as you're moving through the process. You're going to get dirty. It's a greasy, dirty job. Your hours are going to be horrible for the entire career. I don't care how senior you are. And it's a challenge on your family life. And so when I look at women who've gone through the whole entire career process and taking charge of their lives, a lot of them have actually chosen to leave aviation to raise a family. So I don't see the barrier for entry into it anymore, but I see different challenges now, actually, once you've gotten into it, and then finding a spouse that maybe understands what this, is going to be required of them, not just for the pilot. But so if you skip all the way back to when I started, back then I just wanted to fly. I was working the front desk of an FBO when I was going to college. Got a free discovery flight next door. The flight instructor let me fly and land the airplane. That was it. I was hooked. So never went out, set out, didn't want to prove anything, didn't even acknowledge that I was just a girl flying in aviation. I was just a pilot, just like anybody else, and just taking that mindset with me no matter what. I was faced with discrimination and sexual harassment. And if you don't have thick skin in this industry, you really shouldn't be here because that's part of the personality. You've got to learn to hone your humor and understand that everything you see, you have to laugh at the human behavior. And they kind of, whether we like it or not, it's still kind of a macho attitude in the industry. But I think there have been enough leadership women out there and iconic women that are changing that idea. So that's kind
Okay.
of a nutshell for the
Oh
whole
boy.
span
You're
of time.
cracking up a can of worms in the sense that what I like to do is listen to um, the words you choose to use and then dig in. So one of the words you chose there is you got to have thick skin. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? I know you talk about being able to laugh off different personalities, stuff like that. Thick skin. How do you get it? Where does it come from?
Yeah, it takes time because we're as human beings. What are we going to remember? We're going to have the insults and the people that throw up those barriers. That's what you're going to remember, and 99% of the rest of your life is actually great and amazing. You can get through, but those are the things that you're going to perceive as a roadblock. And when I dig into the pilot personality and what is it that can drive somebody into that industry and keep them there and keep them happy, part of it is having this compartmentalization of their ability to detach feelings from the moment. You need pilots to have that ability. It's actually a skill because when the engine is on fire, the human behavior that should happen is that it's an emergency. But as a pilot, you need to be able to separate and not react to those kinds of things. So you have to be able to do that in your daily life too. So, just I see people using that as an excuse to quit aviation, just saying, there was dirty jokes going on, just crude behavior. You have to be able to stand up to that because we won't change the next generation unless we do. And we come up to it instead of hiding away from it and backing away. You just need to walk up to it and say, hey, we can have fun in our jobs. We can love our jobs, but at the end of the day, I'm just a pilot, not a woman pilot, just a pilot, and I expect the same behavior and respect that I'm going to give to you. So I just too often have seen women giving that as an excuse to not want to be in the industry anymore.
Right.
And I think that if you've got the right personality, you will thrive in it despite all of that.
If there was a type of training that would help a pilot deal with those circumstances, because this is something I hear a lot, frankly, Erica, is, you know, people need to. And the one question I keep asking myself is like, okay, well, it obviously seems harder, like easier said than done, right? I definitely agree that we need to get better at this. I definitely agree that it's a skill and it's something that takes time to practice. What have you found in your experience? If somebody focuses on a specific thing or a resource or a concept, what do you see helping people shift those behaviors and those leadership skills? How do you build leadership skills?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to put it in perspective. Just like you said, you're going to remember those bad comments. when I look back at my entire career and all the people I flew with, hundreds and thousands of people that I've come across in my career, 90% of them are amazing people. They are going to treat you with respect. That 10%, if you look at their emotional intelligence, they're just horrible across the board. So you have
So
to remember.
when you say emotional intelligence, can you just break that down? So when you say they're horrible at emotional intelligence, what are the specific things that somebody would see that indicates that somebody's poor at emotional intelligence?
Yeah, and when you ask questions like that, I instantly put myself in the hierarchy of a cockpit because I flew the 727. So there's three pilots in there, and my year as a flight engineer in there was the best training ever because I got to see that inner communication between the captain and co-pilot. So watching those leadership skills and seeing even a first officer, a lowly first officer, actually have more ability to captain that flight than the captain himself or herself. And there's a lot of layers to it. Having leadership, good leadership, is having that situational awareness in that moment, and that comes with having empathy to instantly be able to see the situation from the other point of view, and that applies so nicely during an emergency. If during an emergency, what's going to happen? You're going to get tunnel vision. You're going to focus in on that one thing. But in that one moment, the most important thing is for you to take in all those little details. So that reflexive emotional intelligence will say, this is, I'm not necessarily right. Because a lot of times we'll jump to conclusions about what we're seeing. But if I allow that other person to say, hey, I think it's this or I think it's that, it'll shake your own mindset and your tunnel vision to bring in some more information. So leadership brings in all these weird little skills that at the core comes down to that emotional intelligence and your ability to actually just sit and listen to somebody else and actually listen to what they're saying. Yeah.
So one of the things I've worked through that, um, I hear this a lot, and I hear it in what you're saying as far as, we're talking about emotional intelligence now, we're talking about leadership, and um, one of the things that I've kind of worked with a lot of people on trying to close this loop. When I look at like those 10%, you're talking about 90% treat you with respect. It's easy, and then there's that 10%. They're rude, they're passive aggressive, whatever that is. Um, one of the actually, maybe I'll tell us a quick story on this. When I started leadership training, I was going out to the companies and saying, "Hey, here's what I do," and companies really wanted leadership training for especially for their pilots that are upgrading to captain, right? But one of the things that started happening is these operators would call me and be like, "Hey, I have this pilot who needs leadership training." I said, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" And back in the day, I'm like, "Yeah, give me everybody, right? Leadership training's for everybody," and it is. But when I finally asked, like, what do you mean by that? Oh, he's really difficult, or she's really difficult, or they're nobody wants to fly with them, and all these different things. I started asking a different question. I said, okay, so nobody wants to fly with this person, right? They're having conflicts, they're having personality clashes, whatever it is. I said, and you think they are the ones that need the leadership training, right? What about all the people around them, right? That want to learn how to lead that person who's difficult. And so this is kind of the arrival that I came at, the hypothesis that I've been really working through and validating, is that leadership is easy when you're flying with all those easy pilots that are, that 90% you're talking about. Leadership is difficult. True leadership happens when you get into the cockpit with that person that's rude, and you're able to see underneath the rude what's really going on, right? We as humans are typically rude or frustrated or angry. We've all been there. We can all raise our hand, and we've all done it by accident. And it's actually not it's a biological thing that we have, which is basically these reactions based upon our fears and our threats, and we don't need to get into it all. But my question becomes, how do we recognize, when somebody is not emotional intelligent? And I see things like when they're frustrated and they start to blame things for frustrated. One of my things I'm probably going to repeat on every podcast episode is, I think the greatest threat to aviation, not just aviation, but everybody's happiness, safety, joy, fulfillment, anything, whatever, insert whatever you want, dream outcome. The biggest threat to that for everybody is blame. When we blame and point the finger, and we think that the environment, right, is what's dictating our happiness, then we relinquish control of it all. So we get into the cockpit and we have to have thick skin because somebody's rude. Well, I'm wondering about, well, what does it look like to not even think that we need thick skin, but what we really need is leadership skills to see that human being underneath the person who's being rude, because they're either living in fear, or they're living in maybe some sort of scarcity mentality, or there's something going on underneath driving that pattern or that behavior. And that's the number one thing I work with. People come to me thinking, oh, I just had a client today, got on a call, wants my help because he has all these difficult captains that he's dealing with. And by the end of the call, we brought it back around as to, who are you becoming when you're flying with that captain? And he's like, I literally do petty things. I'm catching myself doing these petty, stupid things, and it scares me. I'm becoming a version of myself I don't want to be. That's the real story. It's, who do you become when you're dealing with that difficult person? So that's my own little rant on the whole situation. But yeah, in your career, dealing with some of that, especially as a female in this industry, what are some of the specific phrases or sentences or comments, or anything specific that you can kind of share with people to help them maybe approach those situations as best as possible?
Yes, and I love that. And I really had never thought about it, but it's so true because I think as soon as you started saying that, I had these images of these captains come into my head because these guys are such good pilots. I'm talking, these guys can, whatever the emergency is, whatever the situation, I know we're going to get there safely, but they're just assholes, right? But when they are, I do, it becomes a safety situation because you do instinctually, I still remember it in my head doing petty things because these guys were such jerks. I'm like, fine, you're wrong, but I'm gonna let you do it. I'm gonna watch you do it because I want you to see that mistake. And so you're so right. If
Every
we did
pilot listening right now is shaking their head. Yep, yep, I've done that.
we do. We don't want to admit it, but so many times, yeah, you just don't flow as a crew because you're just fighting against that one personality. But you're right. If we could train everybody else to get past that and just look past that initial human reflex to say, okay, I don't like this person, because you're gonna have to fly with people you don't like. At the airlines, business aviation is a whole other beast. Um, Especially when it comes to hiring, how important it is to get a crew that works together, and how do you interview for that? It's so hard. And just last week I got a email from somebody he's only 23 years old. He's got 5,000 hours, all this PIC time, but he isn't getting hired. And he's not getting through the HR portion of the interviews. And I thought, okay, and when I tried to explain to him that they really are looking for personality types these days, he instantly shut it down. He's like, well, I'm not going to change who I am for this. I'm like, well, if you don't want a job at the airlines, then don't change. But so there's a great moment for somebody if we were able to work with that person and say, hey, the airlines really want you. Once you walk in the door at the airlines, you're all the same. You really are. You've met the threshold of flying for them with your hours and PIC time. Now what they're looking for is your ability to work with a crew, and it's so hard to interview for. But if we included that in the training, maybe we could adjust some of that. It's a great concept. So my head is spinning from what you said.
Yeah, well, this is highlighting where I look at the belief behind every word. So one of the things that I've discovered is, and I mean, this isn't anything new. This is my discovery in the sense that it's new to me as I've learned a lot of these things with behavioral change. Is every behavior is driven by a belief. And so when I started thinking about that, years ago, what I started recognizing is like, okay, so if I figure out what the belief is that's driving the behavior, then I can ask myself, okay, is that behavior getting me to like my dream outcome? So I'll give you a quick little side note for me I was in Air Canada. I was at the youngest possible age to get hired, and a captain by the time I was 30, but I was about 28 years old, and I knew I was almost becoming a captain, but I was in miserable relationships, and just they were great, good looking girl that had a great job and made good money, and I'm just like, this is miserable. And I kept pointing the fingers, thinking it was them. and I would fly with captains, and I'm like, oh, if you weren't such a X, then I wouldn't be. This would be so much safer and easier to fly with. And what happened is I started thinking, well, what if I'm just looking at it wrong? Right? And that was a belief shift for me, and I didn't recognize it then and how powerful it was. And I said to myself, so what if I just shifted the lens in which I'm viewing this? What would happen? And I just explored it. And so I hear words like, oh, that person's just an asshole, right? And I think, well, what if I'm just misunderstanding them? And what it did, and it's not that I'm excusing somebody's behavior, what it does for me is it doesn't make me frustrated or pissed off at them. It gets me thinking, well, what's the leadership move? What if I'm misunderstanding that person? What would I do? Well, I would get curious, right? So when somebody's an asshole to me, I think, oh, this person needs my help. Because there's something under there driving that behavior that they're probably not even aware of. Right. And so that's the lesson that we're, in aviation, like it really isn't a knowledge game anymore. Right. Even the aircraft that I train on, they literally say there's no memory items. Right. They recommend, I fly Gulfstream, they say there's no memory items. They recommend knowing the first few actions for the high pressure moments. So it's interesting the way they word it. But that just tells me, like, you have an iPad and I can type it in and search something very quickly. So it's really not a knowledge game anymore, because if you try to sell me on your knowledge as a pilot, I'd be like, oh, well, just hold on a second. Nope, you're wrong. I can prove it to you, right? I can prove it to you in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So as a big captain, right, most of that generation, what I found is the most difficult pilots to fly with were the ones that thought they needed to know everything. Right. And when they think they need to know everything, if they make a mistake, then they look weak. And then what happens is they actually have to know everything because the other person's shut off and isn't going to want to help them because they're coming across like a dick, right? Or an asshole. So one of the things that I started doing is saying, okay, well, that person just fears that he needs to know everything, because aviation literally teaches you, you got to know, you got to know, you got to know. But really, what I'm seeing in the industry is the shift towards emotional intelligence being the most important skill. Right? How do you read that person? So if I read that person as an asshole, I shut down or don't even try. I actually just blame them for the reason I'm feeling frustrated. And that's unemotionally intelligent, because now my happiness and frustration is dictated by the environment that I'm in. Versus leadership or taking the lead, for me, looks like, oh, okay, I wonder what's really going on underneath that shell. He probably feels like he needs to know everything. If that's true, right, then what he needs is to know that I'm vulnerable and I make mistakes and it's okay. And so I'm going to lead with some vulnerability. I'm going to lead with that. And he might, maybe he'll open up to me. And if he does, if I get him to open up, then he won't feel the pressure of needing to know everything. And then all of a sudden we have a two crew environment again.
Yeah, because it just dawned on me, every time I think of the word leadership, I'm always thinking of leading somebody else, but you're talking about leading yourself. I mean, and if you do that one thing, there's nothing you can't work with, right? So yeah, so I guess in the same regard, you don't need that. It's developing a thick skin by leading yourself and setting your own standards and morals and going forward with that. So yeah, that's
Yeah, the thick skin is like your boundaries, like knowing when to say, hey, listen, if you're going to talk like that to me, then it's creating a safe environment. And if we continue to have a safe environment, I'm going to need to X, right? I'm going to need to tell the chief pilot, I'm going to need to not fly with you anymore. And what you're doing is you're not, boundaries. A lot of people think boundaries are these bad things, but what you're really doing is just giving somebody options when they're emotionally charged or emotionally like hijacked. So when I'm emotionally hijacked and I'm frustrated, I'm not rationally thinking. I'm defending myself. I'm usually just trying to justify, and I'm defending. I'm not thinking about anybody other than myself. And so if my wife comes and she can set a boundary with me, she'll say something like, hey, Kyle, I can see you're frustrated right now. And when you're frustrated, I'm scared, right? And when I'm scared, then there's no love between us and we can't work together. So if you're going to continue to be frustrated, I'm going to need to give you some space. And so now I have a choice. Oh, continue to be frustrated or come back to her. And both are fine. If I need to be, I'm like, oh, I need some space. That's fine. But doing that in the cockpit, you can imagine how amplified the entire, you know, uh, I guess the consequences are, right? Like they're amplified. So getting really good at these skills is everything. Um,
So I think from now on, anybody who is going to join onto a dating app has to listen to your podcast for a few minutes, and then they have to send a certificate in, and then they can join the dating app. Because I think what you're saying actually trickles into a society as a whole. Um, Before we started recording here, we were just briefly talking about how much things have changed. Because for us going through it, it moves so slowly. But if I contrast now to when I started, we really have started a shift. It's going to take a couple of generations, but I really do see just the mere fact that we're having a conversation like this in public is huge. And for me as a woman watching a man doing conversations like you do, I'm so grateful. I just cannot tell you how ecstatic I am to see you being willing to get up in front of people and talk about really hard things in front of people. We those conversations may go on behind the scenes, and that's a great start. But to actually have now men out there saying, "Hey, life is really hard. Let's actually try to do something about it," and it spreads into everything, even as our society, our culture as a whole can bend and move with what our leadership does. So having people out there like you talking about it it's such a moment in our history. I think it's just changing for the better.
yeah, and vice versa, right? Like you're somebody who's been, I mean, this is what brought us together is after reading your book and hearing the stories, like you lay it all out on the table, the challenges, right? Even if it's as you navigated your life, you didn't know how to navigate it perfectly. It's so secondary. Like even, me sitting here and sharing some answers that I've come to, it's so secondary to the fact that I'm just willing to share what was happening. But over time, it's validated the new belief, which the new belief to me is leadership is like a good leader is humble. And we hear that. And I heard that years ago and at Air Canada, actually. And I put up my hand. I said, well, what do you mean? Like, I think I'm humble, but all the indications around me indicate that I'm not humble. And I was so confused because I have this standard of leadership, which is humility, but they didn't know how to tell me or teach me how to be humble. And that's where I went on my own journey. And so this kind of leads me to what I talked about at the start too, is this idea of intentions versus impact. So one of the things we teach at first class leaders is intentions are invisible, impact isn't. And it shows up in my life all the time. I'm still uncovering the patterns I have. One of the ones I just uncovered was you misunderstood me. And I thought about that because what I do is I look for negative reactions. So when I have a reaction that isn't the reaction that I was hoping for, then I ask myself, okay, so what was my intention? Well, my intention was to like help the person understand me. And I'll say something like, okay, you misunderstood me. And I think, okay, well, my intention was to have good communication. The impact is that they felt like I was blaming them. And I sat there and I'm like, holy crap. That's exactly what happens. If somebody says you misunderstood me, they're literally making me feel like they're pointing the finger at me and saying it's my fault for not understanding what they said. And I was like, holy smokes. And so when I focus on impact, I'm a leader. If I focus on intent, I'm just a human trying to justify myself and blame everybody else. So that shift has been huge. Anything come to mind in your career, in your life where you did something, you maybe weren't having the impact that you wanted, and you shifted and you started to have the impact that you wanted?
Oh, I think of lots of situations. And by the way, when we get done here, I'm going to call your wife and I'm going to find out
If that's true.
if it's true.
Oh yeah.
Um, no, I think, throughout my career, I've had tons of aha moments, just so many. I think one of my favorite ones, I had just upgraded to captain. And even just talking about that, that was just a seniority number. There was no captain's training back then. My number came up, I was qualified, up you go. So here I go into my very first flight off of IOE. I walk in the door because you don't know who you're going to be flying with. And then Flight engineer is a 62-year-old retired 727 captain who worked at Continental Airlines and was now my flight engineer. I am a 31-year-old woman, and I walk in the cockpit door, and he took one look at me and he goes, "Oh my God, no way." So that's how my very first flight goes, right? I knew the first officer, and so I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. I did. Instead of looking at that just going, I'm like, oh, I'm going to really enjoy this because I was at the peak of my game. I really did know that airplane inside and out. There's nothing I didn't know about that airplane. I was confident with it. And so I was not going to be kind of confrontational with this person because I really was going to relish this moment. So, just I could see instantly him just pushing back on any type of, even past the SOPs and stuff. And I can see him just kind of not wanting to help and kind of push back and just, jab and shut down any kind of conversation. And so I think my goal just on those first couple of flights with him was just to set the tone. And you can do that quietly with just loving your job, loving what you're doing, and acknowledging that what was happening between him and I was there. And so I was kind of giving it back to him. And I could see the first moment I kind of openly pushed back and was making fun of what he was doing. I could see him going, like, not quite sure what to expect with that because he wanted me to respond a different way. And so when I responded completely opposite, was going to have fun with this, I could see his demeanor change. And after those first couple of flights, we ended up flying together a ton, and we would still have conversations outside of work. And over the years, we would just, every time we'd see each other, we just give each other crap and have fun with it. But it took my mindset to just right away say, okay, I'm not going to follow a line and respond the way he wanted to. And I think it just instantly changed the table. So for any situation you're in like that, I think if you just have one moment to say, okay, let's not do what they want me to do. Let me do what I think I need to do here in the situation. You have that power without them knowing it. That's the way to do it. That's the trick, is not let them know and just do it.
It's often an aha moment when I'm either one-on-one coaching or group stuff, and I throw out the idea, and I say it like something like, let's what if we humor the idea that everything is just literally an opportunity to learn, right? Right? It's just like we can see it as a problem, right? Somebody's jabbing you, right? You're a female captain, and he's obviously feeling threatened or whatever it is, and so he's responding the only way he knows how to respond, which isn't healthy. We can see that from the outside, but leadership is telling us, oh, this is an opportunity for me to like lead this person. And what I hear you did really effectively is mirror him, right? So he's presenting a behavior towards you, and then when you present that behavior back, he maybe saw what the behavior looks like. And, it's a very effective technique. I mean, obviously it has its limits depending on, what kind of person we want to be when we're mirroring. But yeah, like a very, very effective tool, right? Mirroring back the behavior that the other person is having oftentimes will help them to recognize what they're actually doing and change the dynamics. So very cool. Any other good ones that you got?
Well, let me think of a few, but I will say I'll follow up because I was teasing him that because I didn't drink a lot of coffee back then. It's bizarre for a pilot, I know, but I'd always make him go back and give me some coffee, and I
Yeah.
did just for a joke. And every time I'd see him, then he's like, "I'm gonna go get you some coffee." So, but no, gosh, I mean, there's so many instances. Like the biggest discriminator I ever had was actually a woman boss when I was in the business aviation world. It's a long story, but she had hired me away from a competitor, wanted me to bring my Rolodex way back then of clients, and the agreement was that I would be a full-time online pilot, but that she wanted me to work in the office just to get started and everything. So 6 months after getting hired, I hadn't flown a single trip yet. Still working in the office full-time. Nobody else had to work in the office, and finally just walking in the door 6 months later saying, "Hey, you hired me as a pilot. I'm still working the front desk and working charter. What's going on here?" And she just sat me down and said, "Look," she's like, "I just don't believe that our charter clients would be comfortable with a woman pilot." And I'm like, I was just so taken aback because here she is the owner of this charter company, um, operating it on a daily basis. And for her to say that to me, it was just the last thing in the world that I ever expected. So, so I just remember storming out of there going, what have I done? I quit a job where I was flying, and the pilot hiring was really slow at the time. So I just remember going home going, how am I going to break through to this? So thankfully, I lived in Minnesota at the time, so the flu took care of it for me. All the pilots started getting sick out. We couldn't fill the line, and the charter company already had a fatal accident in one of their King Airs, so their operating specifications required two pilots in the King Air. So I just wanted to get my butt in that right seat, and so sure enough, running out of pilots, out of desperation, I got my first flight. And thankfully, on that first flight, one of the passengers we were flying came up to the boss later and said, wow, we've never had a woman up there. We want to have her on the next flight. So I just made sure that during that trip that I was, ultimate professional, went out of my way to make sure that I was, visible to them. And, we just had a great flight. And it just took that one moment to shift her mind. But there's a lot of that out there. It's that initial shift in showing that you can do it, and you just got to be patient with it and try to come up with creative ways. It kind of lucked out with the flu there, but that's how it happens.
Yeah, and that's another reminder. Like, I mean, I will never be in that position that you were in specifically, right? With this hidden belief of your boss that they had this hidden belief saying a limiting belief that was like, oh, I'm scared that my clients might leave me because if I put a girl pilot with them, they might get upset. And yeah, those hidden beliefs are so powerful, and they drove her behavior to literally hiring you, going back on her word, and then right, like putting you in the office for 6 months. That's the power of a limiting belief. And so they're really, really, really strong. And that's the other thing that I've thought about when I look at people like that is like, again, asking you that question is like, how did you deal with that? Obviously there's some luck in there, but the one thing that stands out to me is it, it, it seems like you really focus on what you can control, right? Knowing that you knew the airplane in and out, knowing your capability, remaining confident in your capability, not arrogance, but confidence because you've done the training, you've done the work, and you've seen yourself, you validate to yourself that you're able to do it really effectively. Um, is that accurate? Is that kind of what you were summarizing? Is like figure out who you are, get confident at something, and then those things might not waver you. They might be out of your control, but if you keep your head down and keep going, right, then at some point, hopefully, you get a little break.
That summed it up. I mean, we all have excuses to quit. I've seen
Hmm.
it all, and I especially with pilots, we're still at an 80% washout rate. Somebody who comes into that flight school, 80% of them are not going to continue on beyond just a few hours, right? So what are those things that are happening in that mindset? And it's having an excuse to quit. So if you take that off the table and then you reshift your focus to like, well, I'm not going to quit, so how am I going to fix it? If we can just simply do that, right? That applies for everything in life. So, like when I was in ground school on the 727, they actually had another woman in the class with me. I'm so excited. There's another woman here. They've never had women. We had two in one class, and I still remember she's sitting in the back of the classroom, and all of a sudden we had this like chemical smell coming, and we're looking around going, what is that? And she's back there painting her fingernails during class. She had already failed a bunch of quizzes, really wasn't prepared, wasn't just she just wanted to be there and show people that she is a woman in this class, but she wasn't prepared. And so the instructor pulled her out and said, "Don't do that." And she came to me saying, "Oh, they're discriminating against me." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? No, it's not. That's not what it is." So, I don't want any women to use that as an excuse. If you want to be a pilot in this industry, there's no excuse not to get to where you want to be. So, and if you get stuck, you call me. There's enough people out there. You call Kyle; he'll get you through too. So, if you're willing to put in the effort and you can, hit those skill benchmarks, there's no excuse for the rest of it.
That's it's a really important caveat too that that I've really seen, and I think now is a good time to kind of uncover another pattern that I've seen is most of the time, and I suffer from this all the time. And one of my friends, one of my good friends, he has like one. He kind of has. He doesn't have just one job, but one of his jobs as a friend is he sends me a picture. So when I get indecisive, when I feel anxiety, when I feel stress about usually my business now, I don't have much stress in the cockpit anymore. But when I feel that stress, what it signals, and this goes back to emotional intelligence, when I started really like understanding, okay, when is it that I feel stress and what is underneath it? It's usually because I don't have clarity. I don't have clarity on what really I need. What do I really need to do that moves the needle, right? So for a business, it's easy to get caught up in doing everything, right? Like if you're learning to fly an airplane, let's say you go to learn to fly an airplane and you don't go to a flight school and you just start going to the library and finding books, you are going to have stress and anxiety out the yin yang, right? Because you don't know what to study, you don't know what to do, right? My brother-in-law decided to shift his career and become a pilot, and he was almost not going to do it because he was sitting there talking to me about it because he was complaining about his current job. I said, "What are you going to do about it?" He's like, "Well, maybe I should shift careers." I'm like, "What do you want to do?" He's like, "Well, I think I like being a pilot's pretty cool." I'm like, "Okay, well, what's the next step?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I be so much money." And he started going off all these different things. I said, "No, no, 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 not how much money." I said, "What would a good step be?" And he's like, "Well, maybe I could go to like the flight school and do an introduction flight." I'm like, "Well, that sounds like a pretty good step. Here's use my phone." He called the flight school, booked the lesson, went the next day, came home. He's like, "Oh my God, I know exactly what to do." And that's what clarity looks like. And so, one of the common patterns I see is when we start to search for excuses, it's typically because we don't have clarity. And clarity, when it comes to challenges in the cockpit, in the classroom, wherever it is, I'll share this. And some of the stuff needs to be worked through, so it might not completely make sense, but think about clarity is the idea that leadership is built in the most challenging moments. It's not built when things are easy. That's it. Think about it. How could it be? Leadership is not built in the easy moments. So if you have a challenge that you want to quit on, then what you're basically saying is, I don't want to become a leader. And if you don't want to become a leader, then you're not, then if you ask yourself honestly, should I be in the cockpit if I don't want to become a leader? Then it's a very clear answer. No, you don't want to be there. So and the thing is, it's not anybody's fault. There's no, people reach out to me and over and over again, Kyle, I've never even heard of leadership coaching in aviation. Like I've been struggling with all these challenges. And so I don't think I'm ever gonna have a lack of business for the rest of my life, but that's where it comes from, right? Is well, how do you know what to do if you've never had leadership training?
Oh, so true. And if you look at aviation, it's such a beast. So I think that's often what happens is that even day one of flight training, you think about what is the FAR right now? It's 1,500 pages. You need to know that, right? So I think we send our students off into the sky, we are not being clear on what's going to happen because flying the airplane, yeah, that's actually pretty easy and that's so fun. But to know that you're going to have all these dark hours all alone, learning all these rules and regulations and just going through all that, they just don't realize it. But I think if we do up front say, hey, we acknowledge this thing is huge but we're going to take it one step at a time. What's the first thing, right? You make that phone call. So if you can help lead somebody by breaking it down and narrowing that pathway for them, I think they would get so much farther ahead. There are so many talented people out there who, because they're young and they haven't developed those patterns yet, I think that's where your services would actually help the most, is those people who don't even have their personality set yet, right? You have
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
opportunity to shape it and lay that
Yeah.
path for them.
Yeah, I think that's one of we work with flight schools, and one of the biggest things that I focus on is tying them, these students becoming instructors is kind of the main focus, right? They have a lot of the influence over the students, and a lot of flight schools are having a lot of difficulties with instructors who they're just trying to build hours. Right. So we have a weird industry, right? We have young pilots teaching other young pilots. So it's even more important, right, that we have more leadership training because an instructor, they're not bad instructors on purpose. They're bad instructors because they don't understand, they haven't even been taught or even walked through why, how building their skills as an instructor directly correlates to them as a captain. And you don't become a leader when you become a captain. Like, how does that make any sense? You wait until your captain upgrade and then you go train to be a leader? No, you train to be a leader and then you become a captain if, if you have the technical skills. But the leadership skills start as soon as you can figure out that leadership skills should start. So, I'm constantly looking at like how young can I start helping, and because they don't have all these bad habits. So it's pretty wild to watch within, the span of a 1 day workshop. Students go from, thinking this is another training thing to recognizing how very directly emotional intelligence and leadership directly affects them getting their next job. Why do people fail HR interviews? I failed my first I graduated top of my class, had all the accolades, and failed my first airline interview. And I was like, what? And I literally just pointed the finger. I'm like, well, they're stupid. Like, did they read my resume? That's what I thought. So then I'm like, well, I guess I'll pay somebody to help me with the next one. And they just gave me canned answers. And then I went and got hired with the airlines. And then I just kind of ignored it. But really, what I was lacking is I had no idea how to talk about a difficult pilot, right? I didn't know how to, they would ask me questions about conflicts, and they would ask me questions about, if you couldn't get along with somebody, like, how do you deal with it? And we make stuff up because nobody teaches us actually how to deal with it, right? Because people don't mean to be difficult. Think about it. In aviation, we all have the same goal and intent, the same safety. We all have the same intent. Nobody wants to have a difficult work environment. I mean, maybe the odd person, right? But if that's true, then they're just expressing themselves in the only way they know how, because nobody's taught them how to be a leader or how to have emotional intelligence. So, yeah, it's quite a pivot when you start to look at the world that way, especially in your career.
And flight instructors don't realize the power they hold. They will affect the rest of your life. They really do. And I don't think we teach our students how important it is. And everybody's like, oh, I don't want to quit this instructor, but it's so important that they go
Yeah.
through a bunch of instructors. And this, just to show you how important that they are, my original very first flight instructor, I just got a text from her last week. We've stayed in touch all those years, and so she was my flight instructor, and then we separated paths for like 8, 9 years. I didn't hear from her, didn't know what she was doing, and sure enough, all those years later, I'm her captain at the airline. She walks in the door, and she's my first officer.
Very
I'm like,
cool.
I'm here because of you, even though you're sitting over there. It's because of
Yeah.
you. So yeah, oh my gosh, and to be able to put some leadership ideas and flight instructors, oh my gosh,
You
what a
know,
great thing.
the one word you've used a couple of times is power, and the other word I'd add on to that is I like to look at as influence, the power of influence, right? Because power of influence, when I start to work with people, and myself included, if I just think about myself, which is our natural thing as humans, I really don't I don't really recognize the gravity or the severity of my influence, for better for worse. And the way I look at it is like being a captain just amplifies your influence. So if you have poor influence, you have poor social skills, poor communication skills, poor emotional intelligence skills, you react, right? You get frustrated, stuff like that. That's a sign of low emotional intelligence. And it's not your fault because nobody teaches it. But it does become a huge problem because if you get frustrated as a first officer, you don't have quite the influence. But when you get frustrated as a captain, you have a lot of influence, right? And that's the power that we all hold, no matter what stage of our career. Even a student pilot, if you think power of influence, now all of a sudden a student pilot has a difficult instructor. Instead of giving up, they think, oh, I have the power of influence. How do I build that? Right? Here's an opportunity. So it goes hand in hand every which way, right? Students all the way up to captains, and we work with chief pilots, directors of flight ops, safety managers. It's everybody has the same struggles. We all have these beliefs that are driving our behaviors. We don't like the behaviors. We don't know what to do about it, and that's what we start to uncover and drive. We change the belief, change the behavior. So
Yeah, I think that 80% washout rate is probably the majority of it is that blame. blame the flight instructor. That flight instructor didn't teach me, and I'm done. So
And
yeah.
I'm not ignoring the fact that that is probably true, right? It's just it is true. We get into but if you sit there with an engine fire and just blame the engine fire, right? So it's the same skill. So you blame your instructor, it's the same as blaming an engine fire for your bad day, right? That doesn't help you. It doesn't do anything for you. It makes you feel good because you're blaming the instructor instead of taking any ownership. But just like you're learning, you want to learn the skill of how to react in an engine fire. Well, then you learn how to react when you have a difficult pilot that you're flying with, right?
Perfect
Awesome.
summary. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think our time, I'm sure we can keep going, Erica. I appreciate you so much. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with your audience?
No, it's just that you can always reach me. I really do. I get phone calls every day. If you get stuck with anything we've been talking about here, I'm honestly available for you to
Yeah.
contact me, Erica at achickinthecockpit.com. You drop me a note, no excuses. You let me know what you need and we'll get you through.
I love it. All right, Erica. Well, I appreciate your time and I appreciate everybody listening and just take the lead. Remember, everything is based upon how you look at it and the lens in which you look at it through. And the only person that has power in how you look at a situation is yourself. Eric and I both have a lot of experience flight wise and working with people. So there really is no excuse, and we will help you find all the solutions. So keep going wherever you are in your career. So thanks, Erica. Until next time. That's it for this episode. If something in the conversation landed for you, consider taking the lead and sharing this episode with a friend. And please consider leaving us a review while you're at it. The more reviews we get, the more people we can reach and help take the lead. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.